to another episode of The Invisible Hand on the Fireground. With us tonight, I have retired firefighter Mike Milner from Rescue 4, who's going to share his ordeals on Father's Day of June 2001 and some various other stories from the 70s and the 80s and the war years in the FDNY. So, without further ado, welcome, Mike. Mike, well, yeah, you're retired, but welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate you taking some time out to join us on the Invisible Hand from the Fireground.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I really, like I said earlier before we went on the air, I find talking about the issues I was presented with,
Right.
Getting that out there that you can make it with mental health awareness, support. You can get by and survive and have a great life. And none of this should ever deter you from moving forward, if possible.
So just to recap, I can't remember where I first met you. I know you were in 19 truck, but I can't remember when you left it because I knew you from Rescue 4. When did you get on the job? Just give us a brief up.
I took the test in 71. Okay,
Wow.
to the high school. There was the layoffs, Judge Sifton, and finally, out of nowhere, one of my friends, Dave Lipsky, who was up 94 engine up off of White Plains Road, I believe, not great with company numbers, met me at a bar, heads and tails on Long Island in Syosset, and say, hey, Mike, Monday you started, because he knew Casaburi, who was the chief of training. And sure enough, Monday morning, I got a call over the weekend. My fix again, Tony Fiat, broke down in Centerport. So I called a friend of mine who later got on the job. Dave, I'm in Centerport, not Center Reach. Can you pick me up? I'm on 25A. Well, needless to say, Dave ended up in Center Reach, and I had to call my mother to come from Jericho to Northport to pick me up. Switch cars, while I borrowed her car, was running across the Bluestone in those days. They didn't have blacktop for the probies. You had Bluestone. And I'm running across and you hear probationary firefighter Michael Milner. And I'm waving. And that started my career. And that's why I think I got sent to 50 in 19, but that's another story.
What year did you get to 50 in 19? You went to the engine or the truck?
I started in the engine in November of 77. Matter of
Wow.
fact, I had my first company journal with my RFD the day I got in. I think it was November 16th. And then 3 years later, after constant, not berating, I just knew I was in the wrong company, meaning I needed to be in the truck, climbing around, OV, forcing doors, snot, no man, no one pushing you into a room. You did it on your own volition. And so in I think about 79 or 80, I transferred to, and then in 83, I went to Rescue 4.
I was 83. Okay. So I grew up in Woodside, but my father-in-law was the captain of 41 engine at the time.
Oh, okay,
So,
cool.
you probably you probably ran into him a lot.
Probably did.
Yeah.
Probably did.
So anyway, so you left in 83, you went to Rescue 4, and then you spent the rest of your career in Rescue 4, which is
18 years.
in my own neighborhood. So, you know, Mike, before we start, I wanted to take a moment because there was a line of duty death today in New Haven, Connecticut. Ricardo Torres, known as Rico, was killed. I think he's engine 6 when he was found unconscious on the floor above. And his lieutenant is in critical condition. His name is Samad Rankin. They call him Nuke. So let's take a moment and we're all brothers, and it hurts. And it hurts when we lose a brother. You know, I always say every time I go to a funeral, I say, I pray to God that I never have to go to another funeral again.
Well, that's not going to happen, unfortunately.
And we know it's not going to happen. So it's part of our job. It's the nature of our job,
Right. I mean, I'm a little philosophical about it. There's all kinds of line of duty. And believe me, I only felt that if you die at the explosion, heart attack, you're burned to death. Now, I'm not being morbid at all.
Right.
I feel that being spiritual to a certain degree, if you're going to go line of duty doing the right thing. You're crawling down a hallway. You're looking for a victim in a search above the fire, a cut hole in the roof. And that's how I kind of internalize it and deal with it. because there's a lot of line of duties that, man, that was stupid. You know, I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
No, I get it. I know exactly what you're saying. It's futile is maybe a better word.
That's when it really bothers me. When someone dies, what I just described earlier, I can deal with it. But when someone dies, when it could have been avoided, man, that bothers me. You know, he could have went home that night to his kids or whatever. And life is so short, and based on my background, you got to live every day to the fullest, and you got to be wary about where you are in a building. You know,
Yeah.
It's not just the officer giving you the orders and the direction. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know the construction somewhat, the first and second due engines, who's the next truck behind you, and the type of occupancy. There's a lot going on in your mind beside, and believe me, I hated going to the floor above, because when I got into that apartment and it was all smoke and heat and you couldn't see, man, that gave me the creeps. I'm sorry. I'm no hero. It gave me the creeps because I had no bearing of anything going on other than it was dark, noises, and that starts playing with your brain.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, so the idea of the podcast is the invisible hand. And what we talk about is, and I'm sure you've seen so many yourself, where the unexplained, like, someone does something, they fall through a floor, they fall off a roof, and they survive. And I know you've seen it, I've seen it. And I want to tell you a quick story before we start.
Uh-huh.
When I got to 17 truck, which is the next truck down the block from 19 truck, 55 was in the middle, but there was always 17 and 19. And I remember this one night, Tony Alva just came to our place for 6 hours. 6 hours, right? He's going to work and cover Maxwell's spot for 6 hours. So the tour starts out with a vacant, and the other probie, he drew the short straw. He went out and he had to go get the meal. So I'm on the rig, and we go to this vacant on 149th and St. Anne's, and it was your typical vacant, no big deal. We were there for about an hour, and we came back to the firehouse, and one of the guys went sick. So now they had to, because they had 2 probies, they had to detail one of the guys from the engine to the truck, and they gave him the roof. And so now me and the other probie are in the inside, and our lieutenant from the truck was working in 60 engine that night, right? So anyway, about 10 o'clock, we get another box. It's on Alexander and like 140. She was a brownstone, fire in the basement. And our lieutenant from the engine goes in, and Tony's with me and the probie, the other probie, Frank. And I mean, talk about a guy that's just like knowledgeable. I'm sure you work with Tony, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was like
Lebanese Catholic. Yes, I did.
He was the real
from Jericho. He was the Lebanese Catholic from Lebanon. So we always had fun. Yes, absolutely.
So he was the real deal,
Oh, yes.
And I'll never forget this. So me and Frank were oblivious, and we're going down the basement. We're heading down these stairs, and I had no idea what was going on. I'm holding on to his coat. Frank's holding on to me. And at some point, he grabs me and the other guy, Frank, and he says, "Get out." I'm like, "What?" He says, "Get out." And he flips us around, and he pushes us out down the hallway, out the door. The fire rolls over our heads. And he says to me, "When I say get out, I mean get out," And I still haunts me, that fire, because, if we had like a less experienced officer, I think we all would have been dead, And he just recognized the signs. And, I kind of rehash this in my mind, and there's been other fires like it where we've had fatalities, one in Washington, D.C., one in Boston, the same event. And it turns out the OV, I won't mention his name because it's not important, but he took the windows in the rear without really kind of checking with the engine, and the roof, the engine guy went to the interior stairs. So I don't know what impact that had on us, but all I know is that Tony saved our lives.
Right.
And every time I saw him, I say, "Cap, you saved my life." And you know how he was, right?
Yeah. Well, in those days, first of all, the only fire experience I had was in the volunteers. And I'm not knocking them, but it's like night and day. And so when I got there, I had a lot of Vietnam veterans. There were some World War II guys still around. They all had a lot of experience. Some had worked in Harlem before going to the South Bronx, some in Lower Manhattan with 2 and 4 truck. And so they had a lot of experience, and they actually had that seventh or sixth sense where, like you said about Tony Alba, they could hear or feel something and Mike, time to go. And that's a rare thing to have in the fire service. I know I don't have it.
Yeah.
But there are many firefighters who became officers that have that extra sense. They see something, and my son does some stock market things, and I always tell him, go with your gut.
Go with your gut. That's a great, I love that. That I talked about that last week with a guy from Chicago, and Billy Lawson. I don't know if you remember Billy from 17.
No, the name.
Yeah, Billy was my guest about a few weeks ago, and Billy was one of those guys that even though he was a fireman, he had this great, like he saved my life at least twice, I said, he had this great awareness. He pulled me in, hey, Sparky, get out of here, and sure enough, the building would collapse, But, before we start about the Father's Day fire, I wanted to talk real quick about someone that's really special and dear to my heart. And I know you work with him, and I didn't rehearse this. I want to get your reaction. Pete McLaughlin.
Yes.
Pete, he came to 41, the squad. I left 17 truck. He left 312. And I love what he said to the captain, Tizo. He said he wanted to go to the squad. And the captain said to me, he says, well, you don't have an experience. So what does Pete say? Well, how am I going to get experience if I don't get any experience,
Yes.
So that's Pete.
Yeah.
That's Pete. So anyway, Pete was I just love the guy. And one thing about him is that he kind of changed my life. He really did. He was telling me about this place. It's a Catholic thing, a place called Medjugorje, And he says, Danny, did you hear about this Medjugorje? I'm like, I couldn't even pronounce the name for months, And I started reading about it. It's like kind of this spiritual thing, like a Catholic church thing, And we were going to go there together. And then we were going to sorry?
Like a retreat, Dan?
Yeah, kind of like a retreat thing, like a pilgrimage type thing. And he was so into it, he turned me on to it, and really changed my life, to be honest with you. And then, we were going to ride our bikes around Ireland. We had all these plans. And then, I don't know, then I don't know what happened. Like, we kind of lost touch a little bit because then he transferred out. And anyway, but I tell you one night about Pete, a very interesting story, right? He's staying in my house, and he's in the back bedroom. And I get up in the middle of the night, and I look into his room, and some light came into the room. And it was so silver. It was almost pure light.
Right.
And he was bathed in this light, And I felt this like kind of sensation when I saw the light. And I didn't think nothing of it, And then, so fast forward to Sunday, October 8th, 1995. Well, no, backtrack now 2 days before that. And I had lost touch with Pete for a few days, for a few weeks or whatever, a few months, whatever it was. And I was in Flips, and my mom lived in Woodside. So it was a Thursday night. I used to stay with her on Thursday nights. I said, let me take a walk down Queens Boulevard and see if Pete's around, And I get to the firehouse, and Pete is just leaving. And we had this conversation for about an hour. And it was so deep, And, all right, we promised to stay in touch just before cell phones and whatnot, And then he went on his way. And then Sunday, I go to church, I come home, I'm about to watch the Jet game, and the phone rings. It's Bobby Hamilton from 41. And he's like, Danny, he says, I got terrible news. He says, it's about Pete. And I knew right away, And man, that I went into a little bit of a depression after that,
Well, I can tell you this, when someone dies line of duty, it affects a lot of people. Kenny Memon, who was my best man at the wedding, was the lieutenant that day.
Yeah.
It was a premature retirement for him.
Yeah.
Because it affects your leadership ability as a boss, because you take it personally. It was my responsibility to bring everybody back that day, and it didn't happen. and Eugene Molstadt,
What's that? Yeah.
who, enough was enough. I guess he felt a little more comfortable in the South Bronx, and he went back to his old company. So it did affect a lot of guys, not including myself and everybody else in the house. But those two guys stand out only because it did change their lives more than maybe mine or someone else's.
Mhm.
So, the line of duty deaths, they're like tentacles of an octopus. They reach out in so many directions and affect people in so many ways. And it's tough. It's tough. I can, tell you from experience. You
But
never
on,
get.
but on a kind of spiritual note, so we go to his funeral, and his mom was looking for me, and I went. I do this sometimes. It was that 95 was a tough year because I lost a very, very, very close friend of mine that my grandmother died and Pete died. So the three of them died in that same year, 95. But his mom, who I become close to, Ellen, she wanted me to be a pallbearer, and she's looking for me, and I just was nowhere to be found, But we go to the funeral, and then we go to the cemetery in Northport.
Right.
Now, here's the kind of funny thing about what happened. I'm in my car, and I listen to this new wave kind of radio station at times. So it just happened to turn the radio on, and there's a song comes on, and it says, "If you're friends with Pete, you're friends with me." And I was just like, I just look up, and I'm like, all right, Pete,
Yeah. Was trying to reach.
And I remember, I don't know if it was mother or his brother told me a story that I think it was his mom, or was it even me? And he said that they had a dream about Pete, and typical Pete, he's like, just pretend like I'm in Australia, and I could see almost him saying that,
Right.
So that was my that was my story with Pete. And I still think about him. I call his mom. I can't believe how long it's been. It's been 26 years since it happened.
Keith was in the PD. He used to stop by the firehouse. So that he always kept in touch.
Yeah, his brother Keith. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I want to talk about Father's Day. We had Lieutenant Brendan Manning is retired as a chief. He was working in 163, and we had his story, and I remember seeing him in the hospital after he got blown out the door, and I can't believe that he survived. And then Brian Fay, he was in my probie class. He sat two guys away from me. I mean, Brian gave me my volley helmet, which is hanging on my wall up here somewhere. He gave me, because I couldn't stand that helmet they gave us in probie school. So Brian gave me a helmet. So we always kept in touch, me and Brian. He went to 249 and 155. Then he went over to Squad 288 and then Rescue 4. So, and John Downing was from my old neighborhood. He was a St. Sebastian's guy. So, I spoke to Brendan about that. We spoke about the fire. I spoke to Joe Vasilla. I knew Joe from the neighborhood. He was a Astoria guy. But, I'm reading, Jay Jonas wrote this report, and, I knew you were working at it because I'm reading. I'm like, oh, crap. I said, I talk to Mike like kind of all the time now. And it says, it's your whole story here, what you did. So what's your like, what was going on that day? And I'll tell you just another quick story just to bring, I worked that day.
Right.
I was working that day. I left SOC. I went to 58 Engine. We had a fire somewhere on Lexington Avenue, a small rubbish fire, what a vacant building. I remember 41 leaving, getting assigned on a second lawn to Queens because the Squad 288 was first due.
Right.
And 288 stumbled across this box. And I remember this report. I could still remember it so distinctly. We have 3-line stretch. Trucks are opening up and we're having trouble because we have fire in the basement and all kinds of chemicals, right? So that being said, I leave the room. John Calamari's in there in the next office over. We're both listening to the radio. I come back to the room. I went to the bathroom, whatever. He says, Danny, the building just blew up. I have in my mind this image of 3 lines in operation, the rescue, the squad, everybody in this building, guys on the roof, pretty good sized taxpayer. And I saw the pictures the next day. I couldn't believe that we only, I hate to say this word, but I hate that we only lost 3. yourself included. No.
Yeah. I was, you know, I would, I'll finish the story, then I'll get going. So I don't want to step on your toes. Dan.
No, but so that was my perspective of it, is that I was listening to it.
Yeah,
You know, I had just saw 41, and here's a funny thing about 41. I mentioned this in the last story, but 41 made a wrong turn. They were supposed to make a right off that bridge, and they just kept going. So it delayed them. And then I know there was a Freon leak. I don't know if you guys were on that box, but they had a supermarket, so everyone was out of order.
well, we were on our, I mean, interrupt. We were on our way where we got turned 10-2 and redirected to Astoria at the Triborough Bridge at the tolls. We turned around there, and go back to your story, then I'll tell you what I think.
No, so that's about as far as I go. I just all I could say is that I walked into my office, and John, you know John Calamari, right?
Yep.
He just says to me, he says, Danny, the building just blew up, and my blood just ran cold. Because I had this visions. I mean, I've been around long enough now where I've been to building collapses, I've been to explosions, flashovers, and I've seen less things cause so much. Mike, I saw one time in the projects on 143rd Street, like one of these kind of half-ass projects, you know, not the real projects, but the ones with the sheetrock walls. The lady had roach bombs in there, just 3 roach bombs, blew the walls and the windows to bits, right? So now you're talking about a hardware store with hundreds of gallons of flammables and aerosols and all that kind of stuff. And all I could think of is like, my God, what is happening over there? I was just horrified. So
I personally believe in fate. Okay. And fate is tied into God, or like a guy who has his hand on your shoulder. And if he taps you, you're going. And in this case, if we had been at our quarters when that came in, I don't know if we would have all been in the same spots as far as where we were located in the building. We might have gotten there a little later than we did when we were on the bridge going to the Bronx. So we got there really quick. And you know, you know, you look around, you know, we knew what we were told there was a storage of paints and thinners and all that stuff. But you know, you just absorb it and you keep on going because there was no indication of an explosion for that matter. And I had the OV, so Brian asked me to go to the floor above. We had done some things a little earlier, and he was on his way down to the basement with John Gaines and Brian Hickey, and I think Brian Fahey was already down there. Okay, and there was an explosion. Now I didn't know they were there in the basement or going down. I knew where I was. I didn't know where Harry Ford was, and I didn't know where John Downing was. Okay, I knew where I was because somewhere in the first couple minutes we were there, and I'm on the second floor. Brian Hickey, the captain, said, "Mike, what's going on there? You smell anything?" I said, "Yeah, I smell a lot of paint thinner." I'm sure I'm elaborating more than it really was, but I swear to God, as soon as I said paint thinner, within seconds, I hit my head on the roof of the building, the ceiling, fell down and rolled out onto a pile of rubble, which at that time I didn't know contained the bodies of John and Harry. And I ran around to the front of the building like you instinctively do. You know, I kind of like looked in the air, I guess saying, wow, what happened to me? I mean, I can't believe I flew in the air and I'm still alive. You know, but then you get that calmness. So I rolled out of the building and I went to the front. I met Brian and John, and then we realized that Brian Fahey was missing. We didn't know Harry was missing. Then we tried to contact Harry, and we got no answer. And that started the House of Cards. It was just a bad day. I got to say that, and I hope a lot of guys that have power ladders that are chauffeurs are listening. John Downey didn't have to get off that pedestal. He could have stayed on that pedestal and be alive today. And I know he wasn't looking at the dangerous part. He saw Harry having a hard time with some of the gates on that floor exposure, I believe. And he went down to help Harry. Didn't have to do that. Now that guy's a hero.
And I never knew, I never heard that. And this is the first time I'm hearing this. And yeah, that's remarkable.
Yeah, and I hope anybody that listens to this on any job in the fire service realizes that, that show for John saw a problem and addressed it to the best of his abilities until it exploded. And unfortunately, that was the end of Harry and John. But I always admired that courage and that insightfulness and intelligence to realize I got to get down there and help. He could have turned the other way, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He went into the danger, not away from it. I really appreciate John wherever he is.
I read the report that Jay Jonas did, and it's one of those buildings where in the front you have the 2 stories in the front and 3 in the rear. So, Bill Seelig was the chief in the 4-9, and Bill is a phenomenal guy. I mean, he wound up being the head of SOC at some point. Billy was just, I remember him covering in SOC. You remember him covering in 41, and the guy was just on the ball, and he made a good call. He was like, let's get that back door open and let's get the line hit it on its own level, And I saw the door. There's pictures of that door. Brendan Manning was telling me that they had to get the Hearst tool. It was kind of encased in the cement, and it was like the door from hell, So I do remember hearing firsthand. Now, Steve Garrity was a lieutenant with us in 41, and his brother Timmy was in 288, and I think he had the nozzle. And Dennis Murphy was the officer, right, the captain of 288. And I think Timmy. I remember the funeral. So many guys were banged up. There was guys on crutches, and gauze still wrapped around their heads, and one. I think someone was even in a wheelchair. It was just really horrific.
Well, for me, it was the second bad day of my life. So I got to be honest with you. I was trying real heavy to get out on a Section 8 because my brain was pretty well fried after that Father's Day explosion. It didn't work out that way because I ended up on medical leave, getting in my car and going to 9/11. So, but then after that, people I think up in the medical office realized that a Section 8 or psychological issues are real and got to be addressed, and they are a line of duty situation as far as retirement, in my opinion. Okay, it may not be a shoulder or a muscle, but that brain can take a big beating.
Yeah,
it hurts.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about 9/11 yet. I know the 20th anniversary is coming up, and I plan on doing a few episodes on 9/11. I was there, you were there, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I know that Father's Day fire. Here's the funny thing about that day is that it was Father's Day, and I had family over from Ireland, and they were at my house, and that fire happened. And I'm trying to explain to them that this is like 3 firefighters dying in one fire is unheard of. It's like a major catastrophe for us, and who knew 3 months later what we'd be dealing with, right? So
yeah.
But that, even for me, like, I think because I was kind of buffing that fire, for lack of a better word, but I was very intent on, it was like kind of my old neighborhood. I'm from Woodside, but Astoria, my dad was from Astoria, so I knew that neighborhood. I know Astoria Boulevard. I know that whole, I used to go down there all the time. So I was interested. And I tell you, when I heard that building exploded, that hit me like my blood just ran cold in my body,
Right.
And I was envisioning like the worst. Like I thought that, Warbaum's or the Father's Day or the 23rd Street fire would be nothing in comparison to this.
Yeah. It's just, no death is easy to handle, but having 3 fathers dying on Father's Day, that's a rough deal. It really is. That's tough. I will say this though. I ended up going into the Exposure 2 basement. I think Chief Moran was there, Paul Yeager from SOC, a couple guys from the 288, and it really was a futile situation. But I know Chief Moran was trying to keep us busy and felt that, listen, if we can breach that wall, Maybe we get Brian out, which he actually came up through the interior stairs later on. But every time we breached the wall, it was like a rocket flame coming through the wall. And, I knew, I think that we all knew that, let's do it, but we're not saving anything. He's dead. I don't mean it in a bad way. I just came to realize that no one's surviving this torch effect. And, what can I say? And I didn't even know Brian that well. I knew him a little bit from him training at the Bethpage Training Center as a Nassau County training chief. I knew him a little bit, but once again, there's something about line of duties. Brian was there a short time. I didn't really know him that well. I knew Harry real well.
Yeah.
I've been to parties, birthday parties. So I knew Harry real well. But sometimes not knowing a guy that dies at your watch is a little harder to accept than knowing the guy for a while.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Mike. I get that.
There's that big unknown. What if, I know Harry was funny and great fireman. He only called you an asshole when you deserved to hear it.
Right.
And that's the type of guy he was. And he was pretty intelligent guy, did crossword puzzles. But with Brian, I really didn't know him much. And when I did work with him at Fort, he did a lot of the drills because he was good at it, and who cares? I'm not that good at it. If he's better than me, let him teach the saw or whatever it might have been. So I didn't really get to know Brian as well. And that goes the same for the guys that died on 9/11. Some of them were there a month. Pete Brennan, Mahoney, I hardly knew them. I hate to say that.
Pete Brennan was good friends with Pete McLaughlin.
Yeah,
because I remember Pete talking about him all the time.
Yeah, and there's another couple of guys like that I didn't really work with them.
Right.
And that hurt me as a human being. That I didn't have a chance.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because as a battalion chief, as a battalion commander, I did this. I went into the they call it HRS. It's and I made a file on every firefighter in my battalion. So I have a file of about 150 officers and firefighters, and you're right on the money. And I write all their kids' names down. Where do they live? And I want to get to know them. And I make it a point every time I visit a firehouse.
Can I tell you something, Dan? You're on the right track. I was thinking about this today because someone had brought up DiBernardo's name in Kilker from Division 6. How good at Chiefs they were. And I also had Gauchis and this guy, Bob Nemesek, tall Polish guy. And I was marveled about this guy because he did exactly what you did without the files. On Christmas, he had a ham at every firehouse. He personally delivered. He knew everybody by name. Everybody, every fireman, every officer in that division. I don't know how he did it. He knew their names. And you're on point doing that because that's a little bit of a difference by doing that. It shows humility on your end. You're at their level. And when you say a guy's name once in a while, how's your kid Brian doing, or Betty? That's a big deal. That guy walks back into the kitchen, goes, "Hey, Sheridan's a good guy." But you need that. You need to build up your own advertisement. Being, you gotta be honest with yourself. It's all part of being an officer. If you can't advertise that you are one of the men, I work with you, I'll protect you, and I'll make sure everyone comes home safely at every tour.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, they're you know what? I take it to heart. I just lost a guy in my battalion. His dad was a fireman that I didn't, back then, Mike, we all knew each other. It seemed like it seems like the Bronx was a big place, but it was so small. Like, remember we had the 9th Division, we had the 5.5 Battalion, but we all kind of knew each other.
To your point, I think what happened, and it has nothing to do, it could have been in any division in the city. Before cell phones and iPads and 24/7 news and cable, you had a black and white TV with 5 channels in the house watch.
That was it.
You had a payphone.
Outside phone, yep.
And you had to sit in the kitchen, or you were working out maybe, or studying. So there was a lot more camaraderie and involvement with each other's lives. And instead now, Mike's down there on the iPad. he's doing this, he's on his cell phone, or he's looking on the stock market on Bloomberg, and things have changed.
Mike, I make note of this. I'm at the kitchen table the other day, and I just do this all the time. I just look around, and all I see is everybody on their cell phone. And you remember when we were working, you were 19 truck, man, what a great place. And I was in 17 truck,
Oh,
no
yeah.
TV. It was just like
Well,
the
no, it was,
kitchen the kitchen was the hub, you know?
yeah, exactly.
And we knew about everything about everybody, you know, the wives' names, the kids' names, you know.
Yep.
And I miss that. I miss that.
That's why I think having a folder on every company with the names of the guys and their kids is an important step in the right direction. They're not going to do it on the firefighters' end, but if you can do it,
Yeah.
and press that on some of the company offices down the road, for the next chiefs that come in, I think that's the way to do it. I mean, it's the only thing left you can do.
Yeah. So we had a tragedy back a few months ago. One of our firefighters was killed in a snowmobile accident.
Yes.
And I had a file on him, but I knew his dad. I knew his dad, his uncles. I knew his uncles. You know, I kind of, you know, that was an advantage. I knew him. He's from Morris Park, but you know, it's just so important for us to keep that camaraderie. You know, because we have brotherhood. You know what I mean? It's just, and it's, you know, Father Mike Judge used to say this. You know, he said that, you know, he just thought we were special people. You know, we had that camaraderie. We looked out for each other, right?
Well, let me tell you something. I'm only smiling because it's an afterthought. First of all, number one, Michael Judd's first line of duty was Tom Williams. Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, I always like, may sound bizarre, but don't take it personally as a Christian. There was something about a Jew going to a Catholic church for a funeral. There's just something, or a memorial mass. There's just something that I really start listening. I perk up.
Yeah.
Alert. I'm looking around. I'm listening. So, you know, once again, there's that spiritual thing that comes into play. And for me, I find a lot of comfort in hearing a priest at a funeral or memorial mass.
You're the chosen race. We're the Gentiles.
Tell me about. I was Harry Ford would say, Mike, you're the only Jew that never studied. So, you know, there you go.
Oh boy, I tell you, we could talk all night. Well, Mike, listen, I don't want to hold you.
Now remember this, I'm still friends with, we're ex, but we're really close. We got sons in college, so we work together. That's the only way you can do it when you divorce. You work as a team. So there's no animosity. So at the time I married Melissa, she was 19 years younger than me. So keep that in the back of your mind as I tell the story. Yeah, I robbed the cradle. I got it. So,
I'm not saying anything.
I did it for you, Chief. So the one day I walk in, and it's March 6th, my anniversary, 1 year. And I said, you know what? Next week I'm taking Melissa up to ski in the Mount Tremblant in Canada, and we're flying Air Canada and blah, blah, blah. Oh, my sister-in-law Julie works for Air Canada. I'll get you first class and all that stuff. Okay. So we're on the queue at LaGuardia. Now, remember this, she's 19 years younger than me. Okay. We get there, and out of nowhere, Julie goes, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Milner. We skip the line, first class champagne, coming and going. So all the way back on going and coming, both of us are going, how does she know me? We never met Julie. For the 19 years. So I go back to the firehouse, and Harry's doing the crossword, Daily News crossword puzzle in the kitchen. I go, Harry, how did Julie know us? I said, look for the old man with his daughter.
That's good.
Yeah, I had to get that in tonight because that's how a lot of these guys are the laughs. The fire's a reason to remember. It's those down times at the firehouse with a cup of coffee, a bagel. You know,
that's a good. That was Mike Milner from Rescue 4, and I tell you, we could have spoke all night, but at some point we just had to cut it. And he tells some great stories about the 70s and the 80s and the FDNY. So until next time, we'll see you again, and be safe.